she says we got nothing here. So let me go back and see what's happening. Have a look again, honey. Looks to me like it's good.
Okay, now it's going.
Okay. We've got, I'm afraid we've got just a terrible delay is what it is. And so it sometimes appears as if I'm not actually streaming when, in fact, I am. So sorry about that. I've got the best wife on planet Earth, and she was just watching out for me there. But we are going to be doing a number of things in the course of this evening that kind of make it sort of a hodgepodge in a way. But I hope we can finish the first chapter and take care of all this ancillary material this evening as well in that 1 hour. All right, let's then think about this as an assignment. I have been providing to you very devoted students what I hope is a college level experience, a very determined study, a fuller study, giving you reasons then to have more certainty in what I'm presenting as opposed to the studies I typically see. I have, I've spent a lot of money on commentaries, read a bunch of them through the years and attended classes and just seen a lot of stuff. And I think it's this lack of background material that has so terribly misled everybody. So here's yet another one of these extra assignments. Your mission, should you choose to accept, first is to really read now. I am going to try to do 1 chapter a week. So you can read that chapter in preparation each week. You can reread the one we've been studying, pardon me. Seems like I always have this at the start while your voice acts up. Okay, then though, I would like to start providing for you, much like I did with Ed Wharton, the recordings of the first time I was ever taught this approach to the book of Revelation. So quite a few of you did tell me that you listened to Ed Wharton on Matthew chapter 24 from 1975. That was the first class I ever sat in where anybody taught that Matthew 24 was all about Jerusalem and wasn't, schizophrenically split in the middle somewhere to march off 2,000 years later. But here are the Ogden recordings. Arthur Ogden. What a marvelous man. He had been dissatisfied, as I had been dissatisfied with the previous lessons that I had learned on the book of Revelation. There was just so much of it that didn't make any sense in these other schemes. And so in 1976, he began a very determined study, or maybe concluded it, I'm not sure now, but 1976 is the year that he uses for having made up his mind that the book of Revelation was primarily, though not exclusively, but predominantly speaking of the fall of Jerusalem, predicting that fall in a near-term future with events that would historically come to pass. Now, in 1987, he'd been teaching that for 11 years, but I'd never heard his name. And so he came to Washington State, held a meeting, and then I asked him if he would do something that is just so unreasonable and ridiculous. He had come intending only to be preaching, expecting only asked to be teaching 1 lesson a night for a week on the book of Revelation. And so I asked him to do another 2 hours a day, every one of those days, in the mornings and afternoons, so that we could do a verse-by-verse commentary on the whole book of Revelation. So far as I know, it's the only recording that exists of Homer teaching this material that fully. And so I'd like to send it to you. If you will send me an email to the address that's on the screen there, larry@truthondisk.com. Capitalizations don't matter there, so just larry@truthondisk.com. Make sure you spell disc with a C. A lot of times people use the K and then it won't come to me at all and they'll wonder. So larry@truthondisk.com. If you will, each week or maybe in advance want to listen to these, send me an email and just request them. I made a test run this morning. First chapter was 14 megabytes. It's audio only. There's no video involved, though I do have the video. I'll send you the audio only by email, and you'll be able to listen to the chapter as well. He'll provide a lot of information that I won't touch on each night, on fairly rare occasions, he'll provide an observation or a belief, an interpretation on a given passage that I'll disagree with. He and I didn't agree on everything. But I think if you'll simultaneously take both of these classes, then it surely do you an awful lot of good. Now, this is concentrated study. If we're going to go to college, you don't take one class, and sit there and never do any homework or anything. Let's be serious. So please request those recordings, and I'll send them to you on a rotation basis or as a whole series in a single day if you like. Also, I'd like to point out, I'm going to do something unusual tonight. I still prefer the New American Standard over any other translation, although the New King James is an awfully close second. Love the New King James, really great translation. But the New American Standard's parent, the Lockman Foundation, has just released, which you can see down here in the bottom, and I've just blown up, their 2020 edition. So they began translating back in the 60s. They updated it in 95, I think it was. And now we've got a 2020 edition. So tonight, the scriptures that I'll be putting up on the screen are scriptures that are from that translation. So if you do notice some very tiny variations in what you're maybe used to hearing, or if you're reading a New American Standard, you'll have your first opportunity to look at it. It's also mine. I have it only in a software version for the eSword program, which I use quite a bit. And so look for the New American Standard on slides like this. I just want to begin this evening by reading the entire chapter, which I will put on the screen for you in this 2020 edition just out of the New American Standard. Here's what the first chapter sounds like. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, everything that he saw. Blessed is the one who reads, and those who hear the words of the prophecy, and keep the things which are written in it, for the time is near. John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is, and who was, and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth, to him who loves us and released us from our sins by his blood, and he made us into a kingdom, priests to his God and Father. To him be the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. So it is to be. Amen. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is, and who was, and who is to come, the Almighty. Verse 9, I, John, your brother and fellow participant in the tribulation and kingdom and perseverance in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like the sound of a trumpet saying, write on a scroll what you see, and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Now I want to stop right there, and let's take these first 11 verses and consider some of this introductory material and some review material before we go any farther in the chapter. And so first, of course, here's our Mediterranean Sea, and we have the Middle East and Europe and Africa, Northern Africa. We have basically in this map what is the extent of the Roman Empire, which on a further chart I'll have better, more precisely defined for you here in a little bit. But if you'll notice in the dead center there where it says Greece, and on large letters, you look just a little bit off to the right there, there's Patmos, marked with that white dot. Patmos, among so many of these Grecian islands, a very small island itself, and it is, of course, to the south and west of the western portion of modern-day Turkey. And we're going to zoom in on this area right here, which is just the western part of Turkey, and the next map. As we look here, we'll see all of these 7 churches popping up one by one. Ephesus, where it's labeled in the far left there that Paul had spent 3 years, I've circled for you there, is the church that's the closest to Patmos, the most direct line of travel by boat to Ephesus. And you'll remember it's inland a little bit too. But there's Ephesus. And then one by one, and in the order that they are revealed in the book of Revelation, we have Smyrna, and then Pergamum to the farthest north, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and then Laodicea, which I've also circled there. So we have Ephesus and Laodicea at the bottom, and these 7 churches form an uneven and unbalanced kind of a pyramid, if you will. But on the furthest that they are apart from each other, once the ship hits the land and gets to Ephesus there, the first church that's named, then it's roughly 100 miles out to Laodicea there, and it's roughly 100 miles from Laodicea back to the north and west again to get up to Pergamum. So 2 different ways, really. The furthest extent of the regional grouping of churches that we have here is something like 100 miles. Now, you can see on this chart as well that they're really tied together by a series of valleys that would make travel quite easy to do. And then, of course, the intervening mountains, which would be quite difficult to do. And so you'll note that all these churches are down in the valleys where you'd have your typical roadways. I'm told, but I haven't seen the actual source material, that these 7 churches actually formed what we might think of as a mail route as well. That in the Roman delivery system, you would have messengers that would go around in this triangular pattern through the obvious valleys that form the perimeter of that triangle. I'd like to suggest to you there that I'm well aware that Colossae is also in this general region, and that it's maybe only 10 or 15 miles to the east of Laodicea down there. So yes, certainly there are other churches that are in Asia. Troas is up farther to the north there. So no one suspects it or suggests that these are the only churches that you have in Asia. But God has picked these 7 churches to have John record very personal information about. I'm thinking that we would not want to have been one of those churches, because it certainly is a warts and all kind of a presentation. People would spend the next 2 millenniums down to this day reading such personal, insights and where we've failed as well as succeeded. Make me kind of nervous, I guess, to be a member of that congregation. And so why it is that Jesus picked these 7 out of the others alone to be addressed, in such a detailed manner that we'll study probably certainly 2 weeks worth in chapters 2 and 3, I don't know. He doesn't tell me that. Why he didn't want to spend that much time with Colossae, immediately comes to mind that maybe, he got a whole book to Colossae in 4 chapters there, so maybe it was already done. I don't know. But I want everybody to understand, that all the other churches in history, clear down to us in the good old US of A, and I understand I've got 1 student in Africa, I don't know how many others, around the world, they obviously got copies of the book too. These are just the first 7 churches that this material will go to, but these 7 churches were singled out because they were going to be personally addressed. Now, already you might be able to tell I'm getting a bit, not combative, I guess, but I'm responding to arguments that are made against this approach, that the book is preeminently talking about the fall of Jerusalem. And we want to spend a lot of time on that here, probably 30 minutes to come, on that very issue. So people start saying, well, obviously there's more churches, so 7 must be the number of completion or perfection or something like that. Well, maybe it is. But if it is, I've never been able, and I've looked, I've never been able to find any historical record among the Jews, the Gentiles, or anybody else to think that the concepts about perfection and completion and what 10 means and 4 means and 3 means and all of that, I've never seen any biblical reason to accept those designations. And they sound pretty arbitrary to me. This 7 is very specifically 7 churches. They're the only ones by that actual physical, literal, limiting number that are going to be personally addressed. So while I'm sure that you would copy the letters and they'd be distributed throughout the Roman Empire, I don't think that we should just assume that because there's 7 of them, that therefore, that this gives us more evidence about how this number 7 gets used. I just don't see any reason to buy that, and I think it begins to trip us up later as we get deeper in the book, and pretty soon people are saying you can't trust the numbers just at all. They just are mystical and representative and symbolic and figurative, but never exact. And I still believe the old hermeneutical principle or hermeneutic is that you should take anything in its literal application first before you start applying things to it symbolically, even in a book of symbolism. And we'll see that idea time and time again. So what I'd like to firmly establish at the outset here, and again in answer to things that I haven't even introduced yet, Jerusalem got this book. I'm just sure of it. I can't imagine why Jerusalem would not get this book. So the fact that it's addressed to 7 churches in Asia is no argument that it wouldn't have gone everywhere else in short order. More on this in just a minute. But I'm the farthest thing from thinking that we should just presume that because it's initially addressed to 7 churches and they really have the covers pulled off of their lives, that therefore it got limited. Nobody else saw it. Well, everybody else saw it. We've seen it. They would have immediately, I think, begun duplicating this book. So, there's no unique sense that it would be wrong to understand the book of Revelation as regarding Jerusalem because it was sent to Asia instead of to Jerusalem. How does anybody know it never got to Jerusalem? Every Bible book was copied. They were all sent to everybody. Why would this one be unique and not intended for Jerusalem as well? And so that really is my introduction and already first point as I have the photograph here of Perry Mason. Raise your hand if you're old enough as I am to remember Perry Mason. But, this fabled lawyer in television lore, raised a lot of objections in the course of his trials. And some of the biggest objections that I've encountered, at least, I want to talk about tonight. And this one looms really large. I can't rate or rank the 3 that I particularly want to talk about now. Which one is more often used or more intensively used or people have more confidence in. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, people have sure thrown this one at me a lot. And they use it as a foundation for their whole understanding of the book. They say, why tell Asia about Jerusalem's fall? They usually add to this something like, it makes no sense to me, or I can't think of any reason why you'd want to write a book, to Asia that's about Jerusalem. And that's as if the book never got to Jerusalem, which I've already been addressing. There's no reason to think it didn't go to Jerusalem as well. So why assume that? And why build your interpretation of the book on that and rule Jerusalem out so that you don't even consider it because it just seems strange to you? Well, it doesn't seem strange to me at all. I'm pretty sure it did. And in fact, if it's written one side or the other 65 AD, as I'm thinking that it is, they still had 1 or 2 years before Rome would even invade Jerusalem or Israel. And so surely they had free travel and easy, to get it there length of time. Why not? So I hardly think that you can get anything out of this assigning it to these 7 churches as an argument against it teaching about the fall of Jerusalem. And in this same vein here, and we're going to deal with this first one quite a bit. People say it's too far away. It's just too far away. Why would the Asians care? They're not going to be killed. They're not going to lose their homes. They're not going to have to face an invasion. Jerusalem's just too far away. But something that has endlessly mystified me is that these same people are eager to add to this idea that they think the book is about Rome anyway. We've already talked about it a couple of times, and you'll see it again tonight. Yes, there's a terrible harlot city that's going to be burned and eaten and, going to be destroyed. And they assume it's Rome. So they say, I think it's Rome that's the city that's destroyed here. And so why Jerusalem? Why would you write to Jerusalem? And I'm thinking, really? Have you not thought about what you're saying here when you make this argument? Now, please look at this. This is that chart I told you about a little while ago. Here's your Roman Empire in the darker green there, in northern parts of, I guess that's green or gray, whatever that is, in Africa. Okay, so it's the 60s AD. This is the full extent of it at the very time that we're talking about. And you can see Ephesus, very large letters there again, just to the right of dead center in that map. Now look. It is, I get it, it's 625 miles as the crow flies to Jerusalem. But brethren, it's 810 miles to Rome. If this argument says something about being directed to Asia, which is too far away from Jerusalem at 625 miles, so it's about Rome instead, well, Rome's 185 miles farther away by airplane. So, that argument kind of cuts both ways, don't you think? And it's even farther by boat because, as you can see, the route that you take by boat over to Palestine is nearly a straight line. It's much shorter than the red line I've got here, where you've got to sail through a whole bunch of islands now, those Greek islands, and then you got to make a big choice as to whether or not you'll take the northern route and pay the fee and drag your boat across the isthmus there at Corinth, or the route, stay on the boat and go around, but either way, Rome is a lot farther away. This book, I'm really very certain, would have made it to Jerusalem long before it would get to Rome. If the book is about the fall of Rome, then why wasn't it written to the Romans? People throw this argument at me about Jerusalem as if it would have nothing to do with Rome. Well, what's the difference? He picked 7 churches in Asia to write a book about the destruction of a city. I think it's Jerusalem, for further reasons we'll touch on here in just a minute. So, they say it's so far away. It's too far away. When I make the argument that you've just heard, then they'll say, well, yeah, but the fall of the city of Rome is the fall of the empire itself. And so when Rome falls, that'll impact the saints in Asia. I say, oh, yeah? Here's this book that's twice told us in the first 3 verses is shortly to come to pass. And, you really can't even argue that Rome fell much before 476 AD, 400 years later. Jerusalem's going to fall 5 years later. Now, don't you think that for the saints in Asia, the fall of Jerusalem would have a lot more impact on their lives than the 400 years later fall of Rome? I'm thinking so. These arguments, they not only cut both ways, but I think in short order begin to indicate that Rome is a most unlikely candidate to be the city that's going to fall there in chapters 17 and 18. So yeah, it's true enough that, the empire is going to fall 400 years from now, but Jerusalem's fall is also the Jews' fall. It's the 4th largest population of Jews is in Asia. Now, Israel, Babylon, and Alexandria were, bigger in numbers and contenders for the largest concentration of Jews in the first century. But, predominantly Gentile churches or not, it's to the Jews first and then to the Gentiles. And that's the motherland for all those Jews. An enormous number of Jews in Asia, the place where Paul went to the Jews first, in two of his journeys and spent 3 years in Ephesus. There's loads and loads of Jews. They know people in that town. They travel to visit with those people. There's hardly any comparison for the number of Jews in Rome, who the book of Acts got kicked out, tell us got kicked out anyway. Enter Priscilla and Aquila. So there's just no comparison of the interest that these churches would have in Jerusalem as opposed to Rome. And here's one I'd like for you to think about. And still, I'm just harping on this one because it seems to be the one that distracts and derails and I think terribly prejudices, and mistakenly so, most people as they look at the book of Revelation. Think about this now. You're going to write a book, let's suppose now, that to a city that's going to be destroyed in about 5 years, annihilated, and in a spectacular manner that history records as one of the most appalling destructions that mankind has ever witnessed. And it was about 5 years later. So you've sent your letter to Jerusalem. Well, I've been to Qumran probably half a dozen times now. I've watched, the visitors movie that they provide. I've walked all over the site. On one occasion, I begged to, be released from the tour group because I'd been several times before already, and I walked all the way down into the valley below it so I could take pictures up above and see, from below where they found those Dead Sea Scrolls. And you can see on the chart, when Jerusalem was destroyed and people started hiding their valuables because they knew Rome was coming, the Qumran community, they hid their stuff so well it took us 1,877 years to find any trace of them. Well, if you're going to write the book to Jerusalem and it's very shortly later going to come to pass that it'll be, burnt to the ground, it would seem to me if you wanted this book to be preserved for the ages so you and I could study it right now, you'd send it anywhere but there. That's not the place for it. This book is not a warning that you need to get out of Jerusalem. It's not that at all. This is an explanation of why predicted fall of Jerusalem is going to take place. It's not a warning that they need to hear, so for the first time they would just be amazed. Well, what do you know? God's planning to destroy the city. Well, maybe we ought to get out of town. We already know that they'd been warned in Jerusalem for 35 years this was coming. Jesus had warned them about this. The apostles had warned them about this. Stephen was incessantly preaching about this. Brethren, they'd been hearing about it for 35 years. The better question would be, why would Jerusalem need another book about its forthcoming fall in this generation? Well, it'd be, no news to them. So I think they got the book. I think they already knew all these things, those faithful Jewish Christians. And I'm hoping that you'll disabuse yourself of this argument. It is just so full of error. It's not substantial. It hasn't been, I think, really very adequately thought out. It's not sustainable. Why tell Asia about Jerusalem? Well, let me answer this question another way, which is to use the same term, God's way. Now, I've saved this for now, and I'm really going to work it. So here we are at 7:30, and I don't know if I'm going to finish this first chapter or not. But please let me drive this point home. If nothing I've said so far tonight about why tell Asia instead of addressing the book to Jerusalem about a forthcoming fall of Jerusalem, if none of the things I've shown you in perfect plausible answer to this supposed, unanswerable conundrum works for you, then let's think for just a minute about this guy named Ezekiel. I've teased you about him a couple of times, but in my introductory material, I've reserved, the study for Isaiah and particularly Daniel, and Malachi looms awfully large. And we looked at a couple of other prophets, kind of just skipping along. But we're going to talk about Ezekiel tonight. And we're going to ask ourselves, why would you send a book about the destruction of a city to people that live hundreds of miles away? Why would you do that? Here's Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Where's Ezekiel? Babylonian captivity. Who's he talking to? The people in the Babylonian captivity. That's where they're going to stay for a total of 70 years, though 12 of them have already gone by. In chapter 4, the first 3 verses says, "Now you, son of man, get yourself a brick, place it before you, and inscribe a city on it, Jerusalem. Then lay siege against it, build a siege wall, pile up an assault ramp, set up camps, and place battering rams against it all around." Well, that's a whole lot of carving, and work that Ezekiel's got to get busy doing. And then it says in verse 3, "Get yourself an iron plate and set it up as an iron wall between yourself and the city, and direct your face toward it so that it is under siege, and besiege it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel." Well, we just read the whole book of Revelation was signified by an angel. It's signs too. What's Ezekiel 4, the whole chapter about? I'm just going to give you a few verses. The whole chapter, what's it about? It's about a people more than 625 miles away in Babylon being told by a prophet about the soon to come to pass destruction of Jerusalem, employing the term son of man for Ezekiel right now while we think about destroying Jerusalem. And he is going to predict right here with the sign what's going to happen when Nebuchadnezzar comes against the city. And finally, when 586 BC, he tears it down. The temple is completely desolate, just like it will be these 500 or 600 and some odd years later, when Jerusalem falls. What would it be? 750, I guess. So look at it. Brethren, what was Ezekiel doing? Exactly what John's doing. I've never heard anybody go, well, I don't know why he would do that. Why, Jerusalem's 600 miles away. Yeah. How about chapter 5, verses 5 through 8? This is what the Lord Yahweh says. "This is Jerusalem. I have placed her at the center of the nations, with lands around her. But she has rebelled against my ordinances more wickedly than the nations, and against my statutes more than the lands which surround her. For they have rejected my ordinances and have not walked in my statutes. Therefore, this is what the Lord Yahweh says. Because you have more turmoil than the nations that surround you, and have not walked in my statutes, nor executed my ordinances, nor acted in accordance with the ordinances of the nations around you. Therefore, this is what the Lord Yahweh says. Behold, I, even I, am against you, and I will execute judgments among you in the sight of the nations." Now, brethren, I believe before I get done with this fairly lengthy string of scriptures from the book of Ezekiel, that you will have picked up on a lot of terminology that's reminiscent of Jerusalem, and also principles that will explain things, that are found in the book of Revelation. So the symbols, the terminology, and the principles and reasons that are given in Ezekiel are the same ones we're going to find over here in the book of Revelation. Well, would they apply to Rome equally? Of course not. And Ezekiel's writing to people far away in captivity. But God has said here, I think it's particularly important for us to recognize that Jerusalem exists as a light to all the nations and always has. It was placed in the middle of them for this purpose. It has impact, influence. It was supposed to be teaching those nations. So it's not like when you get to the book of Revelation, you ought to scratch your head and say, well, why would Jerusalem matter? But Rome would be a big deal. You know, it's an empire. Jerusalem matters because it is emblematic and representative of the Lord God of heaven, and these people twice, many other times to a lesser degree, but twice, have so offended their God and failed him in their mission to teach the world, both Old Testament and New, that he's going to destroy them. They're useless. Salt's gone bad. Here's chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. I looked, and behold, a likeness as the appearance of a man. From his loins and downward, there was the appearance of fire. And from his loins and upward, the appearance of brightness, like the appearance of glowing metal. Now, I chose to interrupt chapter 1 in the middle and not read about the revelation, the appearing of Jesus in the latter verses of this chapter, but I know you've read them. And I know suddenly you're making a point of contact here. Why, don't you know? Revelation 8 verse 2 sounds like very similar thing that I'm reading about in Revelation chapter 1 now, doesn't it? Here's verse 3 of chapter 8 in Ezekiel. He stretched out the form of a hand and caught me by a lock of my head. And the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in the visions of my God to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the idol of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy, was located. Where does Ezekiel suddenly find himself from so far away? Downtown Temple Mount, Jerusalem. That's where he finds himself, in the visions of God, in the significations of God, in the symbolisms of God, and the appearance and in the presence of a man whose appearance is a whole lot like that in Revelation. Here's chapter 9, verses 3 through 5. Then the glory of the God of Israel ascended from the cherub on which it had been to the threshold of the temple. Wow, the temple's a long way away. Must be talking about temples in Rome, right? Nobody goes that way in Ezekiel. We all know what Ezekiel's talking about. In the latter part of verse 3, and he called to the man clothed in linen, at whose waist was a scribe's kit. And Yahweh said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and make a mark on the foreheads of the people who groan and sigh over all the abominations which are being committed in its midst. But to the others, he said in my presence, go through the city after him and strike. Do not let your eye have pity, and do not spare. Well, brethren, this not only sounds like Revelation now, but it sounds a whole lot like chapter after chapter in the Gospel of Matthew as well. Go through the midst of the city, mark on their foreheads. 7 comes to mind, chapter 7 and 14. And brethren, this is just getting to be a whole lot like Revelation. But what's it about? It's about the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. The destruction of its temple back then, the desolation of its temple back then. And who's Ezekiel talking to? Who's he writing it down for? Why, people that are well over 600 miles away. So I guess it must be talking about some other city. I don't think so. In Ezekiel 12, 17 through 20, the word of Yahweh came to me saying, Son of man, eat your bread with trembling and drink your water with quivering and anxiety. Then say to the people of the land, this is what the Lord Yahweh says concerning the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the land of Israel. They will eat their bread with anxiety and drink their water with horror, because their land will be stripped of its fullness on account of the violence of all who live in it. Well, here comes Matthew 23 and 24, 25. The inhabited cities will be in ruins, and the land will be a desolation. Here comes Daniel 2. I don't mean chapter 2, I mean the book also. so you will know that I am Yahweh. Chapter 16, verse 1. Then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations. Ezekiel 21:2. Son of man, set your face against Jerusalem and speak prophetically against the sanctuaries and prophesy against the land of Israel. Ezekiel 22:19 through 22. This is what the Lord Yahweh says. Because of all you have become, I knew that didn't sound right. Because all of you have become waste metal. Therefore, behold, I'm going to gather you into the midst of Jerusalem, as they gather silver, bronze, iron, lead, and tin into the smelting furnace, to blow fire on it in order to melt it. So I will gather you in my anger and in my wrath. I will place you there and melt you. And I will gather you and blow on you with the fire of my wrath, and you will be melted in the midst of it. As silver's melted in the furnace, so you'll be melted in the midst of it, and you will know that I, Yahweh, have poured out my wrath on you. Suppose anybody would get the idea that maybe there's a God in heaven? Well, where's Yahweh? We don't see any Yahweh. No, you don't, but he's alive, powerful, above. And in previous lessons, I've shown you time after time, riding on the clouds when he destroys a city, coming on the clouds when he destroys a city. And in this case, we've got these evil people. The good ones are nowhere to be found in the city of Jerusalem. Where'd they go? But these evil ones, they're being collected into the city, and suddenly they have become silver, bronze, iron, lead, and tin. In the signification, in the symbology, they're waste metal and valuable metal and melted metal. I'm going to blow the fire of my wrath on you. You'll be melted like silver in a furnace in the midst of it. And one begins to think about the grapes of wrath, gathered in order, to be trampled and therefore destroyed, is an altogether different symbol. So surely it can't be talking about this at all, or something similar to it. I mean, they're unrelated. Brethren, symbology in the Old Testament is understood even by Asian Christians who spent all their lives being Jews until recently when they became Christians, and or Gentiles who have now become Christians, and as you well know, have immediately been taught that the Old Testament matters to them and they'll need to study it too. Okay, and they have been for some years now, before the book of Revelation gets written and sent to Asia. And then, in 24 of Ezekiel, verses 1 through 6, the word of Yahweh came to me in the 9th year, in the 10th month, on the 10th of the month. Now, let's stop here. Let's see, it's a symbolic book. We just saw about the metal and everything. So I wonder what the symbology of 9 is. Well, 9 is 3 times 3. Oh, and it's 6 plus 3 too. And y'all know what 6 means. And then if you multiply 3 times 3, so that 9th year there, why, what that means is, and then off we would go to talk about, this certain and sure symbology about, numerology and what these numbers mean. Baloney. Means exactly what it says. It means 9th year. Then it says in the 10th month. Oh, well, yeah, I know. We never had any information anywhere somebody saying what 9 means, but that 10, boy, that 10 means, perfection or completion or some such. And then it's doubled. It's on the 10th of the month. So, and now we go to talk about completion and fullness, but the last thing we are warned, I get warned, nearly every week it seems like, last thing you should be looking for, is for accuracy and physicality and literality, and actual, time and chronology. What is he getting out of this, brethren, in verse 2? Son of man, write the name of the day. This very day, the king of Babylon has laid siege to Jerusalem this very day. Present a parable to the rebellious house and say to them, this is what the Lord Yahweh says, put on the pot, put it on, and also pour water into it. Put in it the pieces of meat, every good piece, the thigh and the shoulder. Fill it with choice bones. Take the choicest of the flock, also stack wood under the pot, make it boil vigorously, also boil its bones in it. Therefore, this is what the Lord Yahweh says, woe to the bloody city. Vengeance for the blood spilt in Jerusalem seems mighty familiar if you've labored through the last 18 weeks with me. 5 of them just in Matthew 23, 24, and 25. Now, brethren, if this doesn't ring all kinds of chimes for you, then something's real wrong with you. Yes, it is. But if something didn't ring for a Jew familiar with this material, when he starts reading it in the book of Revelation in the 1st century, after he's waited a generation for the prophecy in Matthew 24 and 25 to be fulfilled, well, then there's something real wrong with him. And he probably won't be among the elect, I would guess. So really all I'm saying is, these arguments that I have heard against Jerusalem being involved and the principal city that'll be destroyed in the book of Revelation may not have any answers to those objections that are known by the people that make them. But their ignorance to the numerous answers is no proof at all. Sure, they can't think of any reason why it might be sent to Asia, but I can think of lots of them. You know, I made a whole list in the last 2 weeks, and I haven't even shown you half of it, I don't think. I just finally quit. I could just think of so many reasons why it would go to Asia and be about Jerusalem, and then I just quit making the list. And well, I'm going to focus on just a couple of them for my class, and I'm going to really, make Ezekiel prominent. This is what God does when he wants to destroy a city. He warns them in person with prophets, and then has it written down even to people that are hundreds of miles away, so that the good people, can avoid it, and the bad ones will be destroyed. The good people in this case avoided it by being taken into captivity, saved their lives, and then they got to come back, with Ezekiel. Boy, the bad people are not going to be coming back when we get to Revelation either. So, biggest objections that I've encountered, number 2. I'll leave that one with you, and believe me, I got plenty more. So if you still think that somehow being written to 7 churches takes Jerusalem off the table, can't be about the fall of Jerusalem, well, you give me a call and I'll show you the answer to your objection. Everyone, bring it on. But let's talk about this late date again idea. I know we did already, second class, I think it was, it'd be 4 months back. So let's refresh ourselves. The late date is another one of these real biggies. Well, it just has to be a late date. Brother, let me suggest to you that it is always a huge mistake to force your understanding of any Bible book into a preconceived notion. What do you say? Let's read the book and see what it teaches. Completely unbiased and unprejudiced. Let's just read it and see what it says. What's it talking about? And then we'll decide when it's written. Guys, I'm telling you, it just can't be talking about Rome, but it's sure enough talking about Jerusalem, baby. I'm sure it is. So if I hadn't already blinded myself to the possibility of the book being Jerusalem, because I'm so sure that it had to be written after Jerusalem fell by 20 years and therefore 30 years, and therefore, it can't be Jerusalem, and I refuse to think about Jerusalem. It's just impossible. Well, brother, that's cart before the horse in the worst possible way. So you've already seen this chart. Let me go this way. Revelation 13:18. We got a number, 666. It's the number of a man. It represents a man. They could calculate the number and know who the man was in Revelation 13:18. He had to be living in their time. They knew who he was. Okay? But a long time later, a guy named Irenaeus, it's pronounced a number of different ways, however he pronounced it, he, was born about 130 and he lived about 70 years and died shortly after the turn of the century, 202, is what's suggested. So he's born 60 years after Jerusalem falls. He dies 130 years after Jerusalem falls. And somewhere probably, I don't know if he's writing what in, he's got to be at least 30, let's say. So if he's writing in 160 AD, he's writing 90 years after Jerusalem fell. And a problem has developed in that time frame so long later. So writing about 180 or 190, take your pick, he is quoted by Eusebius. So we don't even have what Irenaeus said. We have what Eusebius said he said about 300 AD. And here's what Irenaeus said as Eusebius recorded it. If it were necessary to have his name, 666 represented a name, if it was necessary to have his name distinctly announced at the present time, 180, 190 AD, doubtless it would have been announced by him who saw the apocalypse. Now stop there for a minute. They're struggling now, like we do, having, come on scene many years later. They were struggling with it. We're struggling with it. What's the 666? And he says, if it was necessary here 90, 100 years later, to have his name distinctly announced, so we would, be told it's Domitian, or in my case, I think it's Nero, rather than getting the 666. It would doubtless have been announced, the name would have been announced by him who saw the apocalypse. It would have been announced by him. Because you see, they've already got the book. It's because they have the cryptic number 666. It's because they already have the book, no matter how you date it. They've already got it in 180 or 190 AD, so they're looking at the text, and the text is confusing. They don't understand what the text means. They're arguing about the text, which even by the late date view they've had for 35 years. The text exists. The understanding has gone missing. So what, brethren? Would you ask the text because it was written closer to you? For it, the text, was not a great while ago that it was seen, that the text was seen. It was not a long while ago that the text came to us. The text is the problem. The text isn't answering the question. The text isn't telling us what his name is. The text is the problem. So, brethren, since the Greek here that I've emphasized with the red underlined in the green can be translated it or he, ask any Greek speaker, that's the fact. Why would anybody pick it? It makes no sense to pick it. The book was written close to us. It, the book, is the problem. If his name was going to be announced, it'd be by him who saw it. What they're saying here is that he was seen. John was seen almost in our own generation toward the end of Domitian's reign. John lived to the end of Domitian's reign. John lived close to when these people, were, is what it's saying. And so, brethren, and that may be so. People argue that it is. I don't know when he died. And if it's him only 40 years ago instead of, 100 years ago or 60 or 90, then they would have asked him. Clearly, brethren, when you really wrestle with the text, it can't possibly be saying the book was written close to us, because the book is the question mark on this verse. He was here kind of close soon, almost, not quite, but almost in our own generation. So if the name was going to be just uttered outright, John would have uttered it. Why everybody, almost to a man, picks it as the book being written near almost to the time, of Irenaeus makes no sense. I don't understand why anybody would do that. The Greek allows both translations. When they translated Eusebius as he was copying Irenaeus, the translators got it wrong and they rendered this sentence senseless. But if he was seen, then Revelation could have been written a long time ago. And I showed you back in that class, in another place, Irenaeus speaks of the book of Revelation as being an ancient writing. If Irenaeus says it's an ancient writing in other places, well, then why would he now say it was almost in our own generation? Anything that's written almost in my generation is not ancient, is it? No, it would have to be written earlier than that. So, please get a copy of The Beast of Revelation by Kenneth Gentry or the expanded version on the date before Jerusalem fell by the same author. He'll develop all of this and a great deal more. And you just got to quit believing in this late date. It's built on sand. And then you go and decide the late date that's based primarily on external evidence that's subject, even just a translation, let alone interpretation, is going to blind you to Jerusalem, so you're not even going to allow it as a possibility in a whole book of Revelation. What a gargantuan mistake that is. Third major objection that I've encountered is that chapters 17 and 18 must be Rome. Well, I'll show you this chart when we get there. There's 9 descriptions about Rome in chapter 17 and 18. At least one of them will fit there's 9 descriptions of the harlot city, and one of them will fit Rome, but the other 8 just won't. So we'll talk about that in detail. But it's not Rome. Don't let that mislead you. So here's Revelation 1:1. The revelation of Jesus Christ. And it is not the revelations. Please stop doing that. Not just because it galls me that people can't read their Bibles any closer than that, but because Galatians 3:16 teaches us that the singular and plural matter. It's not plural. And you hear just constantly people say the revelations of Jesus Christ. It is not that. It is the single revelation of Him. Jesus Christ is not a plurality. The revelation of Jesus Christ. Is this book then something that Jesus reveals? Does the expression just entail ownership? Or is Jesus the thing that is being revealed, the person that's being uncovered, the glory of which is being manifested? Brethren, it's Jesus that is being revealed like God in Ezekiel's day as living in heaven and working from there, destruction on Jerusalem, even if you can't see him. So I'll decide in a minute if I want to go much further, but I certainly want to get this much into this class. I don't know who Joseph Seiss is. I don't even know when he wrote the Apocalypse of Jesus Christ. I've forgotten now. But I certainly want to endorse this quote from that book. Whoever he was, he said this: Apocalypse, that's the first word in Greek of the book of Revelation. It's the word translated Revelation. Quote, he says, apocalypse means something revealed, disclosed, manifested, shown. The verb apocalyptu means to reveal, to make manifest, to uncover, to view. The noun apocalypsis means a revelation, a disclosure, an appearing, a making manifest. The apocalypse of Jesus Christ, Joseph Seiss continues, must therefore be the revealing manifestation, appearing of Jesus Christ. He continues, this is the key to the whole book. It is a book of which Christ is the great subject and center. If the revelation of Jesus Christ meant nothing more than certain communications were made known by Christ, I could see no significance or propriety in affixing this title to this book, rather than any other books of Scripture. Are they not all alike, the revelation of Jesus Christ in this sense? Does not Peter say of the inspired writers in general that they were moved by the Spirit of Christ which was in them? And finally he continues, why single out this particular book as the revelation of Jesus Christ when it is no more the gift of Jesus than any other inspired book? I am perfectly convinced from a review of the places in which the word occurs in the New Testament, as well as from all the contents of this particular part of it, that the apocalypse of Jesus Christ means Jesus Christ revealed and uncovered to mortal view, and not merely Jesus Christ revealing and making known hidden things to be recorded for our learning. So, brethren, what I see here as well, I just concur with that emphatically. This book tells us about Jesus, reveals things about Jesus, gives a fuller understanding of Jesus, who he is, the power he holds, the things that he does, that he is alive and well in heaven. And what he predicts when it comes to pass proves that he is who he said he was. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must shortly take place. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John, is a message from God to Jesus. It's about Jesus, and it is then signified, codified, it's encrypted, if you want, by an angel to John. And then John is revealing Jesus in this manner to his bondservants, right there at the tip of that last arrow in Asia, for reasons that are abundantly plain to me, as opposed to sending it to Jerusalem. Though it got to Jerusalem, he sent it to them to show them the things which must shortly take place. An unusual chain that brought us this book. It's unlike any other that I know in all of the 66 books of the Bible. Let me go ahead and finish this up, brethren, because you've got it all in my notes, and you've already seen this before. So let me just go a few minutes more. The word shortly is used 40 times in the New Testament. It says so on page 18 of my syllabus, and you've all got a copy. If you don't, send me an email. I'll send you an electronic. If you really need a printed version, bound, so it's a little booklet, I'll send that to you too. 9 times it's used in Revelation, that word shortly, and that's more than any other book in the Bible. Every occurrence of its 8 Greek forms are listed in the following word study, which you have on that page 18 in the syllabus. So here they are. Now, I just want to, run through all this. These words do occur in other places in the New Testament, so I'm giving you every single occurrence of some form of this word, takeos or takine or takinein or takion or takista, but I highlighted in yellow take. This is the adjective that's used 7 times in the New Testament and twice in Revelation and in verse 1, also in 22:6. It's used also in Acts 12:7, 22:18, 25:4, and in Luke 18:8 and Romans 16:20. Look them up. Taku is Strong's 5035, an adverb that's used 13 times in the New Testament and 7 times in Revelation. 2:5 and 16, 3:11, 11:14, 22:7, 12 and 20. I made a mistake there. I got 7 times in New Testament. Oh yeah, 13 times in 7 times in Revelation. Okay, twice. It's correct. Okay, the 2 in yellow are the only two forms of the word that appear in the book of Revelation, as opposed to all these other different forms of the same word that appear elsewhere. So here we get this form in John 11:29, Matthew 5:25, 28:7 and 8, Mark 9:39, and Mark 16:8 as well. And then lastly, you got takus, Strong's 5036, adjective, only once in the New Testament, James 1:19. So, but here's the point in all the word study. And by the way, I spent a lot of time on that word study, and I hope it'll mean something to you, because I had to dig it out of my Bible with a painstaking load of careful, consideration to bring me to the conclusions that I've come to, not just because I read it in a commentary somewhere. Now, the examples of shortly outside Revelation. In Acts 12:7, the one we have twice in Revelation, and in the first verse of Revelation, in Acts 12:7, when it's used, it's fulfilled in a minute, 60 seconds. Shortly means 60 seconds. In John 11:29, verse 29 through 31, it also was fulfilled in 1 minute. And that's the form that's used in 2, 5, and 16, 3, 11, 11, 14, 22, 7, 12, and 20 in the book of Revelation. So there they are, all seven of them in Revelation. Two different forms. When they're used elsewhere, they mean shortly. 1 minute. But in other contexts, they're fulfilled. This word is event predicted is fulfilled in an hour or two, 10 days, or a few months. So they're on the screen. Pause, write them down. They're in my notes. You got them already printed. Look it up. How is the word used in the New Testament? Galatians 1:16 is the farthest one out in my view. It could be 2 years at the absolute most. Okay? But I dare you to find anyone that's more than 5 years. There's only 3 possible exceptions. I picked 5 years because, that's when I think the book was written. There's only 3 possible exceptions. There they are. Luke 18:8, Romans 16:20, 2 Peter 2:1. Do those 3, very few out of the long list, forms of this word contradict the concept of shortly measured in a few years rather than in a few millenniums? Do they contradict the other 37? If not, Revelation's primary fulfillment has to be in the 1st century, and Rome won't fall for 400 years. Quit blinding yourself to the possibility that the book's talking about Jerusalem instead of Rome, because Rome just doesn't fit anywhere. Rome's in the book, but it's not the primary thing, and it's certainly not the harlot. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must shortly take place. He communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony, even to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads, and those who hear the words of the prophecy. Heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near, as we've just studied. A different word used there. I won't get into it. Romans 1:4-6. John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead and the ruler of the kings of the earth, to him who loves us and released us from our sins by his blood, and he has made us to be a kingdom, priest to his God and Father. To him be the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. And then he quotes in Revelation 7 from Matthew 24:30, where we have the Son of Man in these 2 places, coming on the clouds, tribes of the earth mourning, even those who see him, every eye. And finally, in the context, I've added some context to Revelation 1:7 there. It's to be fulfilled shortly and near in Revelation and in this generation of Matthew 24:34. So that's where we'll stop for this evening. Brethren, stick with me. I hope to get through chapter 1. We'll fail at that and work with it next week. But looky here. There isn't anything in this first chapter that precludes Jerusalem. There won't be anything precluding Jerusalem from being the subject matter, because this, the book of Revelation, is God's grand finale in quite a few ways that we're going to study. Not the least of which, brethren, is that in this grand finale, the 40 years of having the temple standing and Jews worshiping in it, at the same time you have Christianity and the saints worshiping God in it. We're going to take one of those away. God's grand finale removes any possibility of the Jewish religion ever being practiced again, so that Christianity is God's only religion, and they are his only people. This is what makes Revelation God's great finale and grand finale. It's not because it's just collected as the last, book in the Bible. It's because it's got a message that is about finality. And therefore, brethren, completion and perfection in the manner described. Love you all. Send me an email if you want to hear what Art Ogden said about chapter 1. Hope you will. Have a great week.